This is the Diocese of Truro Hustings for General Synod, and I'm very pleased to welcome one of the 6 candidates, Peter Bellenes, who is now going to do a 5-minute introduction.
Thank you for that, Kate. I'm standing for General Synod, inspired by the writings of Emma Thompson, journalist for The Spectator and The Telegraph, and Father Marcus Walker, rector of Great St Bartholomew's in London. And despite the mention of The Spectator and The Telegraph, I am inspired by them, despite being a regular Guardian, typical Guardian reader. But I draw inspiration too from the Dean of Christ Church, Oxford, who I think has incisively encapsulated the current dangers of the Church of England and its parish system, which flows from a manic attachment to managerialism. Recently, Bishop Philip and Bishop Hugh lamented the lack of trust in the senior structures of the Church of England. Personally, I think that lack of trust flows from a lack of empathy and an addiction to simplistic management algorithms, such as those that suggest our clergy and buildings are limiting factors. We've been here before. Bishop David Pitches in the 90s, referring to the parish system as the condom of the Church of England. The current addiction to grand visions has for me echoes of Lewis Carroll's Walrus and the Carpenter. You know, their great vision of a seashore swept clear of its grains of sand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said it would be grand. Martin Percy, Dean of Christ Church, reminds us that the Church is for compassion, care and service. Karl Barth argued in Church Dogmatics that it was in fact heterodox to strive for growth. He stated that if the Church and its mission is used only for getting larger, the relationship with God will lose its meaning and purpose. The fruits of our spiritual life are in God's hands. Gordon Oliver, writing in Ministry Without Madness back in 2012, had this to say: managerial culture leads to many clergy coming to see their work and even their personal spirituality as an unending series of project management exercises. Like Martin Percy, I too do believe in Jesus enough and what he calls us to do. I just don't believe in those who are proclaiming yet another great leap forward. Like him too, I consider this is just another costly experimenting with people and gambling resources on another vacuous vision. Many of us know, and I certainly hear it from church wardens and PCC treasurers, that this vision is received with the same weariness and apprehension that customarily accompanies just one more new initiative. Personally, I think we are paying dearly for the abandonment of the parson's freehold and its replacement, or not, as many appointments are temporary or short-term with common tenure, and the dysfunctional clergy disciplinary measure. I have acted as a representative of Unite the Union's Faith Workers branch and served on their executive. And I've seen at close hand how people are treated. But don't rely on my word for that. I would suggest, if you've got concerns, you look at the reports from the Sheldon Hub in Devon, which cares for church workers. And now we face the Bishop of Leeds, heading the charge to concentrate power in the Archbishop's Council. It is intended to bring a measure before General Synod to further strip from parishes any remaining power and allow dioceses to proceed with their managerial plans untrammeled by the concerns of ordinary folk. This is a dangerous process. In Winchester Diocese, we saw recently the folk waking up and fighting back. In the play A Man for All Seasons, Thomas More, Chancellor of England, says to his son-in-law William Roper, one-time Attorney General to Henry VIII, if the laws are all laid low, do you really think that you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? In the Church of England, when the checks and balances are gone and all the power is in the hands of senior clerics, who indeed might then stand? But let me end on a lighter note and back to the walrus and the carpenter. I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize with sobs and tears he sorted out, those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Oh, oysters, said the carpenter, you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? But answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now I'm going to ask you the 4 questions that were selected from those that were submitted from your colleagues in the clergy. Question 1. The question that came up most when we asked colleagues what they wanted to hear about relates to the church and same-sex marriage. What is your view on this? What will your approach be when considering debate in Synod?
Well, I think to be very clear, I do support open table in the Church of England, and I do support inclusive church. So no surprise, I'm in favour of same-sex marriage and the blessing of same-sex relationships. But I'm also a great believer in things having to be received within a church to come to a mind. And I accept that there is no common mind at the moment. So I would not wish to see a requirement on all clergy to officiate such life celebrations. That I think is a matter of conscience and should be left to clergy to act in accordance with their conscience, as they do in other denominations, indeed as they do, I'm currently north of the border, as they do in the Church of Scotland. And they've managed to live with that and accustom themselves to cooperating across differences of opinion.
Thank you. Question 2. Campaigns under the banner Save the Parish have had lots of publicity recently. What would you take to General Synod from the issues that they raise?
I think what I would take to General Synod is a wish to reinforce and sustain our parish structure and maintain the rights of the parish. I think they're fairly key, given that Parsons Freehold has gone. And John Hayward, writing on his church growth modelling blog, so I'm not talking about being anachronistic and keeping what can't be sustained, but he does speak of the need to widen the contacts between the church and community. And I don't see how you do that in absentia or sending an odd person in once a month to do a service. So I do think it needs presence. He also talks about the importance of training our people locally. And I don't see the problem in having a local pastor, lay or ordained, stipendiate or self-supporting, to be the parson in the community, which just means person. The person is recognised as someone you turn to. Because I don't think the frenetic merry-go-round of keep on going round parishes from a large team actually would enable that series of contacts to take place. And I do think it's viable to have pastorships. The Roman Catholics did it back in the early 2000s in America, rather than close a parish, appoint lay pastors. So if a clerical organisation, as clerical as the Roman Catholics can do it, I think it shouldn't be beyond the wit of the Church of England. Thank you.
Question 3. We received questions relating to the 5 guiding principles and mutual flourishing within the Church. Where do you stand on the priestly and episcopal ministry of women?
I'm in favour of women being ordained both to the priestly and episcopal ministry, but also for the continual review of the 5 guiding principles. They were meant to be a process, they were meant to be a basis for dialogue, and it's that increasing reception I spoke of earlier as people grow together whilst respecting differences. 16 years ago, I went on sabbatical to Lake Erie in Pennsylvania and stayed with a community of Benedictine nuns. They were committed to the ordination of women within the Roman Catholic Church. They were having a tough time. And on my return, I decided to forego wearing my clerical collar, just as a very minor act, tokenism if you like, but I admired the way they worked for ordination within the Roman Catholic Church. And just before I left, one of the nuns shoved a copy of the National Catholic Reporter under my door, and the front page news was the ordination, albeit illegal, by Roman Catholic bishops of some women in the United States as priests, carried out under the wire, as it were. So they were obviously living in hopes. And we've made progress in the Church of England, and I would hope we can maintain and sustain that progress and be a beacon for our brothers and sisters in other denominations.
Thank you. And your final question, tell us one area where you would like to make progress in this synod. What do you think is the priority?
Well, I suppose I'm going to almost repeat myself and say what I want to see is a reinforcing of the parish structure and a better equipping of parishioners who are able to take on pastoral and liturgical roles. Nothing new. When I was in the Liskeard parish in the early 90s, I led the Bible study in St. Keen, because the vicar at that time liked to send his team vicars all over the place. So the team vicar of St. Keen never saw St. Keen. Interestingly, there was a woman in the Bible group, the Bible study group, who was quite clearly the local presence of the Christian community in St. Keen. She was the go-to person for pastoral care. Now, if we can replicate that, and I'm sure we can, in lots of tiny parishes that are then self-supporting, then I think we're onto something. I had the same experience in the Totnes group when I was with the Exeter diocese. We preserved, after discussing with the parishes what they wanted, liturgical worship every week in every parish using the communion extension format adopted from the Diocese of Carlisle. And it was very successful. And we found what people were able to do with relatively simple training in leading worship and if necessary, using a kind of sermon format that they were given. But it's better, I think, than shutting down the parish and saying, well, you can only have a service once a month. You know, that to me is mad clericalism. We need to look wider, but still value our parish structure. And the kind of perverse clericalism we see, which has seen parishes go down to services once a month, is really an invitation to end the Church of England's presence in a great deal of England.